So if you had to look back, what was the one piece of advice you wish you had received back then?
I think chasing titles, chasing roles is good, but I think chasing growth is far more important.
There are 3 glasses as you can see in front of you. So why don't you make like a perfect recipe of the 3 things one needs in the first 10 years of their career?
Execution and delivery. And so I'll put the first piece there. The next piece is all about
Vivek Gambhir is a leadership powerhouse with over 30 years of experience driving success at Port, Godrej and Bain & Company. He's here to share game-changing insights on how to nail the first decade of your career. He's currently a venture partner at Lightspeed Ventures.
An average period for this learning cycle for those of us who are watching right now?
anything less than 2 years is probably a mistake one has made in choosing the company that you've joined. The minimum it should be.
Somebody who's fresh in the system. How do I look for a mentor?
What I've found to be very powerful is having a personal board of advisors. Maybe I just need far more advice than anybody else.
So Vivek, first up, tell me, why are the first 10 years of anybody's professional life so critical?
The first 10 years is really about establishing a strong foundation. And that strong foundation really helps one get a head start in life. This is the phase when you are switching from learning to actually doing. You're building your reputation, you're building your brand. And so in many ways, the first 10 years, the kind of actions you take actually can be make or break. And the other interesting thing is that you can actually make lots of mistakes. The cost of mistakes is not that high in the first 10 years of one's life.
What really differentiates somebody who's really thrived in the first 10 years of their professional lives versus those who haven't?
The first thing is to actually get the basics right. And it might sound very simple, but just learning how to be at work on time, complete deadlines, communicate properly. The second is that the first 10 years is all about hustle and execution. And outperformance doesn't come from ordinary effort. So it's so important to actually go through the grind and be able to actually put in the long hours. While work-life balance is important, it's equally important to actually learn how to hustle. And while you're hustling, it's also important to figure out a few areas, what we call superpowers. And so, as you are delivering, as you're executing, also figure out 2 or 3 areas which actually start building your brand and make you differentiated.
So my next question was that what are the key 3 elements that you need in your first 10 years of your professional journey? But I'm not going to ask you or make it so simple for you. I have a bit of a task and activity. There are 3 glasses as you can see in front of you. So why don't you make like a perfect recipe of the 3 things one needs in the first 10 years of their career?
The most important piece, I think, is all about execution and delivery. You have to just learn how to actually execute and deliver whatever one is asked to do. And so I'll put probably the first piece there. And while you're delivering and while you're executing, the next piece is all about, developing expertise. And so it's important to actually be very broad, get as much exposure as possible, but along with that, try and start building 1 or 2 areas of specialist expertise. And the final thing is all about learning to work with people. And learning to work with people actually, first of all, starts by learning to work in a team. Everyone wants to be a leader, but it's so important to first learn to work in a team. Second is, most people don't think about managing your boss, but it's so important to learn how to manage your boss. And then the third piece is to actually learn how to collaborate and work with peers. So the third piece is all going to be about connections and teamwork.
Okay, so execution, expertise, and people.
People.
But let's say I have to start my career today. How do I prioritize these 3 elements?
The first step is about building credibility. And credibility comes from actually delivering consistently what you've been asked to do and hopefully over deliver. The second part after credibility is depth. And depth comes from both exposure and getting deep into a few things. And then the third part is about relationships and connections. I would say delivering and execution probably is the single most important thing in the first 10 years of one's career.
Another big dilemma that young professionals tend to face is whether should I stick to one company, grow my roots deeper here, or should I look at switching gears, switching companies? Perhaps it helps them get accelerated in their career trajectory, their pay package, etc. But what is the right way to manage the first early years of your career?
Reputations get built by people delivering consistently over periods of time. So my suggestion would be a builder, not a butterfly,
Hmm.
right? Stick around enough to be able to drive impact and show some tangible results. The second is, as you're thinking about a career, think about your narrative and your story, right? How do the various pieces fit together? How can you connect the dots? Quitting is not bad, but quitting for the wrong reasons can actually be disastrous for one's career. So think about the reason as to what makes you stay and what makes you quit. And so in the book, we have an interesting framework called the push and pull
Hmm.
matrix. So think about the reasons which make you stay in a particular role or a job, and then also look for things that make you want to end up leaving. And sometimes, Karunya, a lot of people end up leaving without seeing if there are enough opportunities within the company itself. So look for lateral growth opportunities, look for other things you can do within the company itself, as opposed to wanting to necessarily quit. So quitting can be actually a great way to have a springboard in one's career, but important to do it for the right reasons.
But I'm going to side with the new or young professionals here because it's hard to sort of focus on the big picture all the time, right? There are so many things happening around you. There are so many temptations, as you said. So, how to not lose sight of the bigger picture or the larger plan that one has? Because is there an average period for this learning cycle for those of us who are watching right now or listening to us right now? I mean, typically in an industry, how long does it take for you to get a hang of what happens? What are the different processes in place and how to navigate the landscape?
I think anything less than 2 years is probably a mistake one has made in choosing the company that you've joined. So, minimum, it should be at least two, ideally between somewhere 3 to 5 years, I think. And then post five, you can decide whether it's the right company, are you learning or growing or not. But somewhere between 2 to 5, I think, is probably a good time frame to think about it.
So, let's say one has decided, okay, I want to explore newer opportunities, whether it's a job, whether it's a break, sabbatical, whether it's education or setting up their own venture. Is there a framework to assess and evaluate these new opportunities?
Yeah. Look, what's amazing right now is that the kind of possibilities that are there today are things we couldn't have imagined
Yeah.
ever before. The starting step again really has to be to look within yourself, right? Put the mirror in front of you to discover what your strengths are, what your superpowers are, and what really again drives you. And sometimes we cannot do it on our own. It's important to find a mentor, find some peers who can actually give this 360-degree kind of feedback in terms of, what really motivates and fulfills you. Once you've figured that out, then the filtering criteria becomes a lot easier because then you can decide what kind of choices you want to make. And then you have to figure out some of the trade offs as well.
Let's say somebody wants to, I mean, we've heard of so many cases where people have dropped out of colleges, very prestigious colleges, and have had beautiful and successful startups. Then there are people who go to a job, do it for 10 years, 5 years, whatever, and then after having a sense of the landscape, then venture out and set up their own company or firm. Have you seen any difference in how they function? Do you think getting that 10 years or whatever X number of years of work X actually has served them better?
It depends on the context. If you really have this idea which makes you almost feel like you can't sleep at night, in Hindi, as we say, dimag mein keeda hai, right? If you really have this obsession, which you feel like is a big problem that needs to be solved
yeah.
and addressed, and nobody else has been able to do it, and you believe you can do it in a better or a cheaper manner than anybody else, go for it. We tend to over glamorize being an entrepreneur or starting up something. Starting up something is not a career, it's not a hobby.
Yeah.
It is actually much more than that. And I see a bunch of folks in business schools, they'll get together into a room and they'll toss around and say, oh, let's create a business, and then they'll create some frameworks and they'll launch a business. Running a business is a 24/7, and it's quite lonely and it's brutal hard work, which is why running a business or starting up something is not a job. And sometimes it's more important to start a job, learn some skills, and then the idea may come along. And if the idea comes along, leverage your experience and then start something. There is no requirement to start early.
But in the first few years of one's career, how can job hopping be thought out more carefully?
First of all, I would always say, don't think about job hopping, think about job rising.
Ah.
So look at every opportunity as a way to learn, a way to grow, and build your credentials so that the next opportunity is hopefully bigger or better than the previous one. So it's important to think about it in that way. And the decision to actually leave something versus the decision to join something are very two different decisions. But somehow in our minds, we try and actually mix the whole thing together. And once you've made the decision to actually leave, I think it's so important to not burn any bridges.
Yeah.
You will need those references. For most companies today, more than interviews, they rely far more on references.
Is there anything called as the right time to quit? How do I know that, okay, now it's time? I mean, sometimes it's one gets tired or there's burnout or there's some negative feeling or thought. And sometimes it's like, oh, great, I've done very well. Maybe my learning curve is plateauing. Maybe not here, elsewhere, I might get a better opportunity or more scope to widen my skill set, my horizons. So, how does one realize when is the right time to make that switch or the job rising that you
Correct.
spoke about?
Number one is if you're working for a terrible boss, right? If you're working for a terrible boss and you've tried hard to fix things and you can't change bosses, and most of us can't, better to just cut your losses short and leave. Second is if you're working in a very toxic environment or if the company's values aren't aligned with yours, I think no point trying to just fight an uphill battle. Those are, I think, very obvious things, right? But beyond that, I think one is, are you learning and growing? So if you feel like your learning is stagnating,
Yeah.
if you feel like you're not really progressing, right, then probably it's a warning sign. The second piece is around validation, right? All of us need external validations. If you feel like you're not getting rewarded properly, if you're not getting the best assignments, if you're not getting compensated fairly, those are again warning signs to say, look, perhaps I want to be able to look for other opportunities outside. In some cases, for some people, I think burnout is a real factor. For some people, they have a higher threshold in these things. It's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
But if you're feeling very overwhelmed, if you're feeling very, burnout, if you're feeling very stressed, if you're not sleeping very well, those are important markers. And then finally, in certain cases, you just might like the glamour of doing something else totally different. And that's totally fine as well. So you might be relatively happy in what you're doing, but sometimes those opportunities can be a springboard to doing something far bigger in a totally different space as well. Little bit depends again on what our interests are. So quitting can be for defensive reasons,
Yeah.
but quitting can be for also what I call offensive reasons, right? You are playing on the front foot and you're using whatever you're working on to find a much bigger, better opportunity.
Let's move on from just exiting and quitting and hopping
Yes.
to more essential things that one needs to master in the early part of their career. So, are there any soft skills or technical skills which are perhaps universal that, irrespective of which sector, career, profession you're in, that you need to master, imbibe, or get during the first 10 years of your career?
Yeah. One is about problem solving,
Hmm.
figuring out a structured way to be able to solve problems and be able to convert data into insights. Regardless of whatever we are doing, learning how to be more objective, data driven, and insight driven
Hmm.
to solve problems is non negotiable. In this world of AI, it's important to also figure out a way to learn technical tools and technology which can work for us to help us become better problem solvers.
Hmm.
The most important skill is actually around communication. Just learn how to communicate well, whether it is physically, whether it is on email,
Hmm.
on written documents. I don't see enough people focusing enough on communication, and there are so many tools available that allow us to be able to communicate with impact, learn about executive presence, learn about being able to convince other people about your point of view. And along with that, the two other softer skills I would say is a little bit on adaptability.
Okay.
Because again, things might keep on changing. But if we know how to solve problems and if we know how to pivot, adaptability becomes the second most important thing. And then the third soft skill is all around teamwork. How do you influence? How do you work in a team? How do you collaborate?
Another important skill is EQ, more than IQ, more often than not, when, you are progressing in your career. Not all of us are very high on EQ. And for those of us who are not, how can we sort of instill that extra edge, you know, um, in our skill set?
Yeah, the three most important aspects of EQ. It's a critical skill set, as you indicated. It starts with self awareness. So self awareness is all about owning your emotions and not letting those emotions hijack your behaviors. How other people actually end up perceiving us in any group setting. The second piece is around the whole idea of being able to communicate. Communication perspective, how are you communicating your message? How are you ensuring that people are aligned with your vision? And the third piece is around empathy, which is all about being able to step yourself in the shoes of the other person. But if we can find a way to combine self awareness, empathy, and communication, that's what really leads to great emotional intelligence.
And communication, we often just assume that it's how you speak or how you write. There are two important things that we are constantly working towards, which you also iterated. One is being a team player, the other is also becoming a good leader, because that is what most of us eventually want to be. We want to get to the top or to the C suite or, own our own business. So, how do you balance this tightrope of team player plus a good leader?
Yeah. Ultimately, look, at the end of the day, it's a continuum. Um, one cannot be a good leader unless one is not a good team player first. Because if leaders also are part of teams at
Yeah.
a different level altogether. So, learning how to be a team player, learning how to share credit,
Hmm.
learning how to collaborate, learning how to influence, learning how to communicate. Those things are equally important for a more junior person versus a more senior person.
Hmm.
The relative weightage of these things might change over time, but the playbook for being effective in a job, whether you are a team player or a leader, there's so many commonalities across behaviors, at least, in terms of what's expected for both a team player and a leader.
How can we effectively manage our time, our priorities, our schedules? Because in the post COVID world, there are no timings. You're constantly on the phone, on the laptop, and you're just a click away. Everyone, actually, for that matter. There are no boundaries, no timings. So, how do you manage all of this
Yeah.
in the new regime?
It's a critical issue, and so many people are grappling with it. And I would almost urge people to think about this as time management, attention management, and energy management. And all three things are equally important. Starts with time, but more important than time is your attention and your energy
Hmm.
in a world where we are so distracted by so many different things. The starting step has to be extreme clarity on what you're expected to do. So much of yield loss or wastage happens because the employee and the boss are not in sync in terms of what the actual expectations are. What are the deliverables? What is the deadline or the timing? Once that's done, the second most important thing is about prioritization. Are you being able to focus your energy and your efforts on the things that truly will move the needle? So, what are the most important things? The third aspect is, look, particularly in the early years, when the focus is far more on execution, the hours will be long. And when you are working through long hours, are you being able to create some amount of micro boundaries? Are you being able to take a certain amount of breaks, right? Are you being able to unwind a certain amount from some of the stresses at work? And sometimes I tell people, please cultivate some hobbies, because sometimes you need other things to do.
Just to cool off.
Otherwise, your entire life gets completely surrounded by work. And then the final piece is tricky. There's so much benefits of technology. And certainly part of, I think, getting more productive is being able to use technology tools, time management tools to our advantage. But all of us spend so much time on just scrolling
Yeah.
on various forms of our favorite poison in social media.
Yeah.
So finding a way to intentionally disconnect also can be a great way to be able to manage time.
Another issue which new or young professionals early on in their career face is decision making. Of course, the stakes are lower because you're just starting out. Nobody is going to burden you with, life altering decisions for the company or for your responsibilities. But these are small but critical decisions. So, is there a frame of mind one can cultivate or a mode that one can tap onto while making small, medium, big, all kinds of decisions eventually?
All of us every day end up making so many
Yeah.
decisions. The key is to have the filtering criteria in your mind on what are no regret moves, simple decisions versus some of the more larger decisions. And then finding a way to probably focus more, obsess about the larger decisions. Don't worry too much about the smaller decisions. Those are no regret moves. Something will happen, it'll work out, it may not work out. You learn and you'll continue going forward. But during the decision making process, I think one very important principle is to be able to separate the urgent versus the important, and being able to know what's truly urgent versus important, and allocating attention accordingly becomes very important.
We've talked about communication, we've talked about decisions, we've talked about cultivating a certain skill set on time management, etc. But when it comes to delivering or yielding results, how can you sort of align all of what you have learned or cultivated and then finally deliver? Because that is the end product and that's what everybody will care. Nobody will sort of think, oh, this person must have thought this through, this person must have managed their time well. Okay, great. If you've done well, people will ask you how you did it. But everybody just cares about the bottom line.
Ultimately, it's all about, first of all, knowing what you're expected to do, right? And being aligned with your boss on the team on what those expectations are. And then being able to actually translate those expectations into tangible outcomes or results within the specified time frame. You may have the perfect deliverable, but if it's late, it really may not be worth it. And sometimes we end up chasing perfection. So in the book, we talk about something we learned called the 85% rule. And we learned this from, Carl Lewis,
Okay.
the very famous sprinter, right? And in a particular, in most sprints, people start blazing and expend all their energy in the beginning itself. Carl Lewis would actually start with, almost a little bit slower, but he would only use 80% of his effort to get to finishing the race on a high. So one of the big principles again here is, as you're delivering, right, don't start chasing perfection, right?
Get started.
Get started. We have deadlines. It's more important to finish the product and make sure that everyone understands what the expectations are. I think expectations mismatch probably is one of the biggest reasons why we end up under delivering on what we are asked to do.
Are there any habits, any tricks of trade to sort of ensure the right delivery and execution?
It all starts with, first of all, being very clear on what the objectives are, right? The second is, I think, having more frequent check-ins,
Okay.
right? Frequent check-ins with your boss. And if you're not sure, ask for help, right?
That's something a lot of us
And a lot of
beg
newer
to not do.
employees
We're scared.
feel like, they've been hired to solve for world peace.
Yeah.
But the reality is that most employees know that there is actually going to be a learning curve. And if you're lucky enough to have a boss who reaches out to you
Yeah.
and is willing to help out, great. But you have to, again, have the mindset of this is your deliverable. So if you feel like you're an owner responsible for something, and if you can't figure it out, then find other ways to be able to ask for help.
Help.
And there's the right way to also ask for help. Get some work done and say, look, I've done A, B, and C, but I'm stuck on D, and there are 3 potential options. Ask people who may have done similar problems before. That's where you need to build your peer network as well, both within the company and outside. There's so many people who can help you. There's so many tech tools available. Find your boss, find ways to be able to check in so that you don't end up, delivering something which is far below expectations.
In the first decade, you're fresh out of college, you start working, and there are, you get tired, you get burnt out, you are sometimes confused, you're not used to the real world, the corporate world, or whichever sector you choose to be in. So how can one sort of manage to sustain that momentum but not compromise their well-being, because the first one decade is the very foundation of who you will eventually become?
Correct. Look, uh, burnout and mental health are very, very real issues, particularly in this world of fast cycle times and social media and technology. Having said that, I think the onus is again far more on people being able to uh, put in the hours in the first 10 years so that they can learn and execute. And how do you find harmony between these things is a very personal thing. Uh, Extraordinary performance, and if that's what you want, will not come from ordinary efforts. But so each of us has to figure out how much effort are we willing to put in. And for the effort, are we being productive, as you were asking? Are we managing our time? And so are we working smarter versus being able to work harder? Uh, Working harder should not be a badge of honor. It's actually a strategic call that one ends up taking. I know we glorify hard work. It's important to put in those hours.
Not all jobs need
But
so
let's
much
not, it's a
hard work.
very personal call that one has to take, and you can decide, look, this is the pace of my career. This is the kind of progression or compensation I'm happy with. For some people, the answer might actually be, end up different. Regardless of that, though, I think it's very important, if you're working long hours, to first of all build recovery periods, right? Ensure that you're eating healthily, you're getting sleep, and you're being able to take some breaks. As I mentioned, it's good to cultivate some hobbies, to have some life outside of work. And it's always more comforting when you have your tribe backing you. So have your support network, whether it's your family, your mentors, or your peers, where you can actually talk about these issues. Many of us are actually struggling with this whole issue of, burnout. So it's important to be able to ask for help, have those conversations. I think employers are also realizing, look, 27 to 30% of the population today is, Gen Z. And Gen Z has very different expectations, of what work-life effectiveness looks like.
Yeah.
And so I think employers are also now learning to be able to be far more empathetic and being able to listen, to be able to create careers that actually work for the younger generation.
But as somebody, who's fresh in the system, how do I look for a mentor? Because that, not all of us have mentors. Even now, there are so many people we speak to, and it's a very rare phenomena, at least in the Indian landscape.
Yeah. And what I've found to be very powerful is almost having a personal board of advisors.
Mm.
So rather than just having one mentor, there are 4 or 5 people I turn to
Mm.
for different areas of advice that I need. And maybe I just need far more advice
I
than
think
anybody
you
else.
just
So,
made it really formal, but unofficially, we all those friends and
but
colleagues.
find a way to structure the relationship in
Mm.
such a way where you are clear about the kind of help you
Advice
need.
you need, yeah.
And think about what help you need. We have these conversations, but how prepared are we usually with these conversations? How often do we have them? Do we actually end up following after the conversation with a thank you and saying, here are my 3 big takeaways from this conversation. Thank you for your insights. I would love to again meet you for coffee in 3 months. And by that time, I'll report to you the progress I have made.
Yeah.
So, in some ways, it's a little bit about creating these informal relationships, creating some structure and some formality to be able to get the most out of these conversations. The second is it's not a one-way street.
Yeah.
So with my mentees, I love spending time with them because I learn as much from
Right.
them as hopefully they are learning from me. So give, but also uh, take at the same time. So the whole giving taking part becomes extremely important, and it's so important to then think through the kind of mentors one actually ends up needing.
We all work towards delivering, towards execution, being recognized, being good at what we do. But to be at the top of your game now, especially, with the Gen Z workforce also coming in, as a millennial, I feel that, I constantly feel the need to stay relevant. And I'm sure people who are senior to me also have dealt with that or are dealing with that. How can one stay relevant? Because in the last 3-4 years, post COVID, we've seen a rapid, shift in how we do business, how we work, how we interact with our co-workers, employees, employers. So staying relevant has become exceedingly important. How do we do that?
The fact that you're recognizing the need to remain relevant probably is the first important critical step. Most people don't think enough about remaining relevant.
Mm.
And as we were talking earlier, in a career that might last 40, 50 years,
Yeah.
right? Think about how long careers would be. And relevancy will actually take about 2 or 3 phases.
Mm.
In my career, I had a 12-year phase as a consultant. I had a 12-year phase in a corporate. And over the last 5 years or so, I've been focused on working with founders and startups and in the venture investing
Mm.
space. So in my career itself, I've gone through very 3 distinct phases. The starting step really has to be being absolutely clear that for us to remain relevant, continuous learning, it sounds a bit cliched, but continuous learning or lifelong learning is absolutely non-negotiable.
Mm.
Nurturing curiosity, nurturing the love for figuring out the unknown, that's a very important skill set to build. But once you've established learning as a priority, the second big piece is to figure out how to learn.
Mm.
And how to learn again requires actually spending some time on carving out time. And the beauty is you don't need more than 15 minutes or 30 minutes every day. There's so many personalized tech tools available, whether it's podcasts, whether it's book, whether there are micro training classes.
Mm.
There's no lack of resources left anymore. So lack of resources can't be an excuse.
Yeah.
And if you truly believe that you want to remain relevant and not get obsolete, and not being able to spend a few hours every week, I think that would probably be a big shame for anyone if they can't spend their time on learning.
If you had to look at or distill your work life lessons into 3 big actionable takeaways, because we'd like our audience to, go back with something that they can really work on or they can take an action on, what would those 3 key things be?
I think number one would be is, look, winging it is okay. We all get overwhelmed with folks with perfectly curated LinkedIn
Mm.
profiles. None of us have figured things out, right? It's important to keep on learning, experimenting. You'll make some mistakes. There might be a couple of steps that are backward, but in a 40, 50-year-old career, things will all end up working out. Don't take life too seriously. That's the number one. Winging it is okay. The second is, you know, create the reality that you want to be, which means you have to own your own career, you have to own your own development. Certainly, you need to ask for help, but nobody will think about your career and your happiness as much as you need to do for yourself. And so, create your own reality and try and make sure that everything else around actually ends up supporting you in being able to achieve what your mission in life is. The third big lesson is the importance of just gratitude and appreciation. I think it goes a very long way for us to be positive, for us to be optimistic. We have the luxury of so many opportunities in our lives, and it's so important for us to be able to actually take a pause, say a thank you, support somebody else in need. And so the power of appreciation and gratitude, I think, can be game changing.
So, if you had to look back the first decade of your professional life, what was the one piece of advice you wish you had received back then?
Yeah, it's a long time ago, but uh, I think, careers should be much more of a jungle gym, not a ladder. And all of us tend to over obsess on linear
Growth.
progress,
Yeah.
right? But the best learning actually comes from embracing the uncomfortable, actually taking some major pivots in our life and focusing a lot more deeply on what our interests and passions and the things that we are good at are. So, in some ways, I wish I had taken a little bit more risks in my earlier life. I ended up choosing the more conventional path, which I think has worked reasonably well.
Yeah.
But if I had to
I'm
do
sure
it
we
over
all agree
again,
with that.
but if I had to do it all over again, I think, I wouldn't worry that much about. I think chasing titles, chasing roles is good, but I think chasing growth is far more important. I think that's I wish in hindsight I would have focused a little bit more on that in my first 10 years.
Well, great chatting with you today, Vivek. We've learned so much, especially all the young and budding professionals who are just, in the early phases of their career. Lots to think about, lots to work upon, and great having you and your insights on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of WorkWise with Naukri. What were your takeaways for the first decade of your career? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more such exciting content and update. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.